Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Would you be so kind as to take a moment and click on the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon? We appreciate it, and we hope it's helpful to you as well.
So, if you're new to this channel, each week, Todd, Leonard, and I, paid professional communicator, we typically we have a conversation each week about the upcoming lectionary reading from the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. Right now we're playing catch up a little bit because I took some time off when my father passed away at the beginning of this month, and so we're looking at. I think this is our last week doing it. We're looking at the previous weekend, last weekends. Next week we'll be looking forward at the coming weekend again. But our goal, Todd and I feel very passionately about discussing these passages in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. Our hope is that our conversation during this time will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we might say during this time would inspire you along with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
Last weekend's lectionary reading is from Mark 6, verses 14 through 29.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, this is a good one. So the Herod passage. This passage, there's a part of me that this passage really bothers. But this is the beheading, John's beheading in Mark 6, and I'm not bothered by it because John was beheaded. I mean, that would be a great reason to be bothered by this passage, right? But when you read, and I didn't make a slide for tonight, Todd.
Oh.
I know that's out of character for me. But if you compare this week's reading with Josephus, it's so tame. It really it makes it looks like it's an endeavor to let, well, most scholars say this, that it's an endeavor to let Herod kind of off the hook. Herod was kind of put into a corner where he had to behead John. That is not the way Josephus puts it at all. So I'm curious. I wonder why they would have done it that way. I mean, is it because they were fledgling in the Roman Empire and live to protest another day kind of thing? What are your thoughts on that, Todd?
I have no idea. I mean, I it's he. I mean, he certainly, in one sense, he makes Herod look weak.
Hmm?
Um, and so it may be a backhanded insult.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it would. I hadn't thought of it that way as you're describing it, but if he is trying to let Herod off the hook a little bit, um, maybe.
I mean, were they just trying to play nice with Rome and, pick which hills to die on? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and by the time you will know this more than I will, is by the time Mark is put together, Herod's out of the picture anyway, right?
Correct. Way
So
gone. Way long gone.
so what benefit do they have in protecting his reputation?
But
Um,
yeah, I don't know. Let me just read. This is Josephus's account of the same execution from
mhm.
Josephus's Antiquities. And if you'd like the reference for this, go to renewedheartministries.com on Saturday, this coming Saturday, and click on the main article there on the homepage. And I'll have all of these references in that article. But it
And
says
actually, you would if you would like to purchase Herb's book, he'll like make you your own slide and autograph it for you.
sure, sure I will.
Your own personalized slide. Imagine that. That would be something. Anyway, I'm
So
sorry.
So Josephus says, when others massed about him, talking about John, for they were greatly moved by his words. And he's characterized John as kind of a social justice preacher here. Josephus has. He
Hmm.
urged he says that John the Baptist is urging his followers to justice toward one another and reverence toward God. And when others massed about him, for they were greatly moved by his words, Herod, who feared that such strong influence over the people might carry to a revolt, for they seemed to do anything he should advise, talking about John, believed it much better to move now than later have it raise a rebellion and engage him in actions he would regret. And so, out of Herod's suspiciousness, John was sent in chains to, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but Machaerus, the fort previously mentioned, and there put to death. But it was the opinion of the Jews that out of retribution for John, God willed the destruction of the army so as to afflict Herod. So the way that Josephus characterizes his execution is Herod was threatened by John's
Yeah.
popularity and just said, easier to deal with it now than later. Had him arrested, hauled off to the fort, executed him. There's no
Yeah.
party. There's no
No.
daughter dancing. There's no illicit wife, getting even. You know what I'm saying? All of this stuff, it's just interesting. It's just interesting, different accounts.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I
So I
mean,
wonder,
in other parts of the synoptics, you have, I mean, Herod arresting John because he was saw him as a threat. So I mean, so the Gospels do identify that Herod took that action of imprisoning him, but as far as the action of killing him, yeah, it's tied to this story as opposed to how Josephus frames it.
and the Gospel of John kind of does this too with Pilate. You know how it kind of
Hmm.
lets Pilate off the hook.
True.
Pilate, with the crucifixion of Jesus, and the synoptics do too, with the exchange of Barabbas and that whole narrative.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was the people. They wanted, I wash my hands of this, that whole thing
Right.
where, Pilate's kind of, and it makes Pilate look weak too. And I just wondered, were these kind of, again, playing nice with the Roman Empire, trying to survive? And I don't want to fault them for that, because I don't know. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know what it was
sometimes
like.
there's clever, yeah, sometimes there's clever choices that are made that say, all right, we're, for the sake of the bigger picture, we're gonna swallow this one.
I think of how the slaves coded their rebellion against the slave masters in American
Hmm.
slavery here, in ways that, enabled them to say something without saying something. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, so I'm just wondering what the tension was that caused them to let these these Roman rulers off the hook. But anyway, what I do appreciate about this week's, as from Josephus and the other part in the Gospel of Luke, I know we're in Mark, but John was clearly a preacher of social justice. In Luke 3:11 through 14, John answered, anyone who has two shirts should share with one who has none, and anyone who has food should do the same. Even tax collectors came to be baptized. Teacher, they asked, what should we do? John said, don't collect any more than you're required to. Then the soldiers asked him, what should we do? And he replied, don't extort money and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay. So, and I've got a whole list of these in my blog this week, but the Hebrew prophetic tradition was one of social justice. And that is, you find that amplified in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I'm just going through them real quick. Hosea, Amos, Micah, Amos, especially. I wish every Christian today would read Amos. Um, but John here is standing. When you look at Luke's description of John, and you look at the Hebrew prophets, their emphasis, John is standing in that Hebrew prophetic social justice tradition,
Mhm.
and the Gospels characterize him as the forebearer of Jesus. Jesus comes next out of that tradition, and so
Mhm.
Jesus is also standing in that social justice tradition, which means in the synoptics, to be a Jesus follower, not to let the cat out of the bag early, but to be a Jesus follower, we should be standing in a social justice tradition too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's really interesting to read Jesus as following in the footsteps of John the Baptist, because we are in Christianity, in in mainstream evangelical Christianity. I think this even transcends evangelicalism. I think that you find this Jesus often even in the mainline traditions and in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I think we have worked so hard to
Elevate,
mm, well, I mean, the idea of elevating him into a god status, yes, that's part
but
of
at
it. But
least
at
above
this,
John the Baptist.
yeah, and elevate, yes, and put him as above. But then all, but remove this prophetic, aggressive
Mm.
work of judgment that Jesus engages in. Jesus is very judgy in
When
his
justice
preaching.
matters.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and condemnatory of those who were who were the powerful and what they were doing to the people underneath them. But Christianity has turned Jesus into this warm and fuzzy friend who saves us from our personal peccadillos and and provides a heaven with streets of gold for us to escape to, um, that
Mm.
has nothing to do with the actual teaching of Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels. Um, but he has been so tamed. Tame is maybe the word I'm going for. Christianity has tamed Jesus so severely,
Domesticated,
um,
even.
domesticated perhaps. Yeah, he's not the wild prophet that the synoptics actually portray him to be. And I think so. When you read the things that John the Baptist preaches, John seems like this wild and
Radical.
radical street preacher. Just saying whatever comes out of his mouth. No internal monologue. No care or discretion. He's just shouting out
No wonder he
judgment
got
on people.
executed.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, he'd annoy anybody. Um, Jesus was the exact same way.
Mm.
Jesus was doing the same stuff. I mean, we get to see more of Jesus, so we get to see him showing compassion to marginalized groups. You get to see some of his
Yeah, I was going
you
to
get
say
to
that.
see you get to see him not only exercise judgment against the powerful, but bring justice to the marginalized and the poor and the outsider. So you get to see the full range of the work of justice in Jesus. Where with John the Baptist, you only get a little bit of the snippet where he seems to be more focused on judging the powers, but not necessarily showing compassion to the marginalized.
Yeah, it seems like today Jesus's gospel. No, let me back up. It seems like in the synoptics, Jesus is preaching Jesus's gospel, not the gospel about Jesus, but the gospel Jesus himself taught, was an endeavor to bring conviction to the propertied, the powerful, and the privileged. There was that. He wasn't warm and fuzzy to them. He
No.
loved them, but he wasn't warm and fuzzy. There was conviction there. There
Mm-hmm.
was there was calling them to account.
Tough love,
He
if you want to say.
Sure, and he practiced compassion and inclusion and justice toward the marginalized. But today, in today's gospel about Jesus, Jesus's gospel today alleviates the guilt or the conscience or the condemnation of the property, the
That's right.
powerful, and the privileged, and has very little to say to the marginalized and oppressed, because it's all
Right.
about getting to heaven. It's not about changing anyone's what they're with the material suffering they're going through here and now. It's not
Right.
about changing society and making a difference, or the kingdom, or whatever language you want to use. So before, it was about bringing conviction to those at the top while including and working for those on the and alongside of those on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's about helping those at the top just sleep better at night,
Right.
and has very precious little to say in regards to changing the actual situations of the marginalized and the oppressed.
Yeah.
If you talk about that in church, then you're just being political.
Right. And ironically, uh, the sad one of the sad iterations of this this modern Western gospel about Jesus is that then it's even been perverted into taking uh, cherry picking scriptures, especially from the Hebrew scriptures, and and turning it into this prosperity gospel, which is actually another persecution against poor people who
Mhm.
are in their desperation to to break free of the system that keeps them down,
Mhm.
then get taken advantage of by religious people who tell them that if they pray enough, if they claim scripture enough, if they give enough of their money to their ministry, that they will rise into
Miraculously have abundance.
and will have abundance because they're being faithful to God. But it's just it's a snake oil pitch by people who have see a capitalistic opportunity with the gospel rather than actually preaching justice and leading a movement to make change systemic structures for the better.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking of the contrast where, today in certain sectors of evangelical Christianity, you have being taught this prosperity gospel. And the Jesus of the synoptics didn't teach prosperity, he taught abundance, and not
Mm-hmm.
in the same way. He preached a message of abundance to the already wealthy
Yes.
in an endeavor to say, hey, there's actually enough provided every day. The sun shines on everyone, the rain falls on everyone. Look at the lilies, look at the flowers, look at the grain in
Mm-hmm.
the field. He preached this message of abundance to try to motivate, or to be a catalyst, to kind of to move those who were hoarding out of fear of
Yes.
scarcity, to share with those whose needs weren't
Yes.
being met, to share with those who didn't have. That is very different. That's a different kind of abundance preaching than the
Yes.
abundance preaching we get in the prosperity gospel.
Correct. I'm so glad
There's
you said
enough
it
to
the way you did
share.
because it's saying to the people who have way more than enough, you're going to be okay with less.
Yeah.
It's but
Yeah.
the
There's still
prosperity
enough for
gospel,
everyone.
but the prosperity gospel of today says to the poor, don't you want to be able to hoard like the rich people do?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
if you are faithful to God, He will help you be hoarders too.
And too
So that
often, Christian financial ministries end up being able to be reduced to just teaching people, middle class people, because the steps aren't possible for the poor, but they end up teaching
mhm,
the middle class people basically just how to play the game of Monopoly better.
right,
And
right,
it's not the gospel.
no, yeah, this is the message of John the Baptist. If you, I'm telling you, I think I told you this, Herb, a year or two ago when I was just preaching through. I don't remember which gospel it was, but I got to this passage where Jesus is condemning the the religious system of the time. He's condemning it for being in the pocket of Roman Empire and for behaving in the same way that Roman Empire was, by exploiting the people and taking advantage of taxing them and taking people's money away from people who couldn't afford to give more money, but taking advantage of their seeking to be in God's favor and were giving their money to the temple. Um, and he's condemning the whole religious system for being in the pocket of Roman Empire. And I just looked at it and I said, this is so completely accurate to our system today and how religion is in the pocket. And I looked at it and I looked at what Jesus was condemning, and I was under conviction that I'm part of the problem. And my congregation, good people, nice people, done some good things, um, but ultimately benefiting from the system of the day. And I just admitted to the congregation in my sermon that I said, I'm sharing with you today what Jesus was actually calling for in reform to the religious system. But don't worry, we're not going to change. We've been we've been a Constantinian empire-based religion our entire existence, and we're not going to change. So I just want you to hear what Jesus actually has to say about what he was hoping for from religion. But don't
Be at
worry,
peace. We're not going to listen.
we're not going to listen to him. I just said that, and it was just heartbreaking for me because I saw how uh, my own personal financial interests were tied up in the religious system as it existed, and how our church's financial future depended on us continuing to operate the way we operated, and investing the way we were investing, and prioritizing the projects that we were prioritizing. Um, and so I just think about, and again, I think I had a pretty good church. I think I had an above average church. It was just still very much a church part of the system. And so I think
You
about,
had a progressive church that cared about social justice issues.
yes, but ultimately did not align our funding
Right. With those
towards
social.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and I see, and so when I read what John the Baptist says and what Jesus says, and how it compares to what happens in our churches, it's night and day difference. And that's true. Again, you and I are good at particularly pointing out the failures of the evangelical system, but I think in this context, it actually is a
Much
condemnation
larger.
of all Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one statement that I want to make sure that is said this week. And that is that social justice, Jesus stood in the Hebrew prophetic tradition of social justice. John the Baptist stood in that Hebrew prophetic tradition of social justice. And today, we too, as Jesus followers, we should also be concerned with social, political, and economic justice. Too often, um, if and there are polls and surveys taken where vast swaths of Christians out there feel like their Christianity has nothing to do with social justice. And that's narratively in the synoptic gospels, that's a real failure. And what it's a failure most of all, it's not even a failure for social justice. It's a failure to love. It's a
Mm,
failure to love our neighbor to the
mm,
degree that we want to see our neighbor thrive. Those who don't have enough. I'm reminded of the words of Dr. Emily Towns. And this was in a very short documentary I watched years ago called Journey to Liberation: The Legacy of Womanist Theology. She states, when you start with an understanding that God loves everyone. Justice isn't very far behind. That loving your neighbor, should move us to be concerned with justice matters. And it's too easy to just fall into the rut of the Christian gospel about Jesus that says God loves you
Mm-hmm.
than the gospel that Jesus himself taught. And that's important. I don't want to negate that.
No,
But
we're part of everybody.
the gospel that Jesus taught in the synoptics was it was teaching us how to love one another, how to love
Mm-hmm.
each other in concrete material ways. And I think we have to allow ourselves to be confronted by that where right now there are large sectors of Christianity who are very engaged in politics, but it's for the means not of making the lives of the marginalized better or making sure women's rights aren't taken away or that LGBT people are included. It's so that they can gain political power in order to enforce their religious ethics and how they view the world. That's very different than being politically focused in a way that is concerned with social justice. And that's what I see this week saying to at least to me, because I mean, John the Baptist, he wasn't beheaded for handing out tickets to heaven. People don't get beheaded
No.
for handing out tickets to heaven. They get beheaded when they threaten the status quo and especially begin to, whatever they're preaching begins to threaten those who have everything to lose if things change. And that's what happened to Jesus. Jesus was crucified in the end. And I know that's not like, a rosy rainbow story. Um, but these are the dudes that we're claiming to follow in our religious faith. What does it really mean to follow Jesus, who was a follower of John the Baptist, who both stood in this Hebrew prophetic justice tradition? What does it mean to really believe in a God that loves everyone? Should we be
Mm-hmm.
concerned with or today social justice warrior and that kind of rhetoric is used as to deride
Mm-hmm.
those who have those concerns. So I just think once again, when you get back to the story, if you can step out of Christianity and just get back to the Jesus story, there's so much there that should drive us to be concerned with the well-being of our fellow human beings. And if you want to call that social justice, fine, but that's what it is. It's about being concerned and taking action for the well-being of our fellow humans.
Let's say this. This is I won't say some people want to talk about what biblical justice looks like. The Bible is is inconsistent about that
That's
as a
true.
whole. But I would say gospel justice, synoptic gospel justice, is loving everybody and making
Yeah.
sure that everybody has a seat at the table. It is gospel justice.
I remember reading years ago now John Dominic Crossan's book called The Greatest Prayer on the Lord's Prayer. And he does a fantastic job in that book of defining the Hebrew prophetic justice tradition's justice as a distributive justice,
Mm.
making sure everybody has enough to thrive. No one has more than what they need, no one has less than what they need. And then the Gospels step into that tradition and amplify it even further.
Yeah.
So, if we're talking about justice, boy, the Bible speaks in a lot of voices on the subject of justice.
Mm-hmm.
But the Hebrew prophetic tradition and
Mm-hmm.
the synoptic
Synoptic
gospels,
gospels. Mm-hmm.
they're preaching a distributive justice, especially
Mm-hmm.
for the marginalized and oppressed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right,
It's
man.
good. It's
That's
good.
all I've got this week.
All right.
Those are my thoughts.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate your thoughts, Todd.
Thanks, man. Anything else you want to say?
Just want to say once again, as we always do, thank you to all of our supporters out there, those of you who support the work of Renewed Heart Ministries, the ministry that's behind this YouTube show. If you would like to join them in supporting Renewed Heart Ministries work, you can do so by going to renewedheartministries.com and clicking donate. This year came out this new book, Finding Jesus, story of a fundamentalist preacher who unexpectedly discovered the social, political, and economic teachings of the Gospels. It's available on Amazon and Kindle, paperback, on Audible as an audiobook too, and renewedheartministries.com. There's so many free resources there on Renewed Heart Ministries. I mean, there's so many rabbit holes you could go down on if you're trying to flesh out the intersection of your faith and your concern for social justice. And you just, check it out. RenewedHeartMinistries.com. Everything there's free. You could spend hours there, I'm sure.
I just had a great thought. I was thinking about this earlier this week. I need you as a favorite son of West Virginia to. We need to have a special broadcast where you review the book Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh my gosh, you don't want me to. My land.
I do. I think it's relevant, it's timely, and I think there could be wonderful ties to actually the Gospels. Not in complementary, but in contrast.
True Appalachian fashion. I only have one thing to say to Mr. Vance. Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. Well, that's just the type of guy you are.
Bless his heart. Oh, yeah. Tune in next week for Hillbilly Elegy. No, just kidding.
We're not doing that next week. We're back on track. We'll be previewing the upcoming weekend's lectionary gospel reading.
Correct.
So that's what you'll see next week. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yeah,
we
thanks for
appreciate
listening.
y'all. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everyone.